The motion sensor chimed at 3:17 p.m. Again. David Reynolds, a 42-year-old civil engineer who worked from home, didn't even need to check the security camera anymore. He already knew what he'd see. The Martinez family from 4 houses down, letting themselves into his backyard like they owned the place. Their 3 teenage kids cannonballing into his custom saltwater pool while the parents lounged on his expensive teak furniture. 73 days. That's how long this had been happening. 73 days of watching his water bill quadruple, his pool chemicals depleted twice as fast, his property treated like a public recreation center. The police had shrugged. His lawyer said civil cases took months. The Martinez family had laughed in his face when he confronted them, claiming neighbor hospitality and community sharing. But David wasn't just an engineer. He was a water systems specialist who designed municipal billing software for 3 cities. And what the Martinez family didn't know was that for the past 2 weeks, David had been installing something special, something that would make them wish they'd never heard the word pool. Before we explore how David turned his engineering expertise into the perfect payback, if you love stories where entitled neighbors finally face consequences and creative justice gets served, hit that like button and subscribe. Now, let's see exactly how this unfolded. This is a story in 3 parts. The violation that pushed a reasonable man past his breaking point, the confrontation where engineering brilliance met entitled arrogance, and the resolution where a simple water bill changed everything. The first part takes you inside David's nightmare. Every afternoon, like clockwork, uninvited guests treating his property as their personal resort. The humiliation of being mocked by neighbors who should have respected boundaries. The helplessness of watching authorities do nothing while his sanctuary became a circus. The sleepless nights calculating costs, the mounting frustration, and finally, the moment when professional expertise sparked an idea that would make everything right. The second part reveals David's calculated response. The careful documentation, the legal research, the installation of specialized equipment his neighbors never noticed. The day he finally confronted them with evidence they couldn't deny and credentials they couldn't dismiss. The look on their faces when they realized the quiet engineer they'd been disrespecting had been 10 steps ahead the entire time. The third part delivers justice with mathematical precision. A bill that itemized every gallon, every hour, every invasion. Consequences that went beyond money. A family forced to confront what community sharing actually costs. And a resolution that proved sometimes the best revenge isn't served hot or cold. It's served with receipts. Here's exactly how it happened. David Reynolds had bought the house on Maple Ridge Drive 3 years ago specifically for the backyard. The quarter-acre lot backed onto conservation land, completely private, surrounded by mature oak trees that created a natural canopy. He'd spent 2 years designing and building the pool himself, a stunning saltwater system with heating, LED lighting, and an integrated hot tub. $42,000 of his own sweat equity and savings. As a civil engineer specializing in water systems, he'd engineered every pipe, every filter, every chemical balance to perfection. He worked from home most days, designing municipal infrastructure for cities across the Southwest, and that pool was his refuge after 12-hour days staring at CAD software. His wife had passed away from cancer 2 years prior. The pool project had been her dream, something they'd planned together. Now it was his sanctuary, his meditation, his connection to her memory. The first incident happened on a Tuesday in late June. David had been in a virtual meeting when he heard splashing. He'd looked out his office window to see 3 teenagers in his pool, 2 boys and a girl, maybe 15 to 17 years old. He'd rushed outside, confused more than angry. The kids had stammered apologies, claimed they thought it was a friend's house, and left quickly. David had checked his gate. Locked. They'd climbed his fence. He'd been annoyed, but assumed it was a one-time mistake, kids being thoughtless on a hot summer day. The second incident came 4 days later. Same time, mid-afternoon. This time, David recognized them immediately and stepped outside faster. But he also saw the parents, a man and woman in their 40s, sitting on his patio furniture, drinks in hand, watching their kids swim. The mother, Maria Martinez, had smiled and waved like they were old friends. When David demanded to know what they were doing, the father, Carlos Martinez, had gestured around casually and said something that made David's blood freeze. "Come on, man, it's 95 degrees. You've got this huge pool just sitting here empty most days. Where's your community spirit?" David had stood there speechless as Carlos continued. "We're neighbors. My kids saw your pool from the trail behind your house. We figured you wouldn't mind sharing a little. Besides, you're home alone in this big place. Must get lonely. Think of it as bringing life to the neighborhood." David had found his voice then, told them firmly to leave and never come back. Maria had rolled her eyes, gathered their towels with theatrical slowness, and muttered something in Spanish that made her kids snicker. As they left, the eldest son had called back, "Thanks for the swim, Mr. Reynolds." David had immediately called the police. The officer who responded, a bored-looking veteran cop named Patterson, had taken a statement but offered little hope. "It's trespassing, sure, but unless they damage something or you want to press charges that'll tie you up in court for months, your best bet is to build a higher fence or get security cameras." The officer had glanced at the pool, then at David's house, and added, "Nice setup you got here. Can see why they'd want to use it. Maybe just let 'em swim once a week or something? Avoid the drama?" David had felt his face burn with humiliation as the officer left. The third incident was the breaking point. It was a Saturday, barely 2 weeks later. David had been grocery shopping and came home to find not just the Martinez family, but 2 other families they'd apparently invited. 9 people total, including adults drinking his beer from a cooler they'd brought, kids throwing his pool toys around, someone's teenager adjusting his pool heater. His custom teak lounge chairs had wet towels thrown across them. His carefully balanced pool chemistry was certainly ruined, and when he confronted them, Carlos had actually laughed. "Dude, relax. You're being selfish. This is a community. Maybe if you came out and socialized instead of hiding in your house all day, you'd understand how neighborhoods work." Maria had chimed in. "My friend Jenny here says her HOA makes everyone share pools. Maybe we should start one here." The other families had looked uncomfortable but hadn't left. David's hands had shaken as he'd threatened to call the police again. Carlos had shrugged. "Go ahead. Officer Patterson already knows the situation. He told us you were being difficult." That night, David had sat in his office, staring at the spreadsheets he'd started keeping. The Martinez family had been in his pool at least 40 times in 10 weeks. His water bill had gone from an average of $180 monthly to over $700. His chemical costs had tripled. His heating bill had spiked because someone kept turning the temperature up. He'd tried to reason with them twice more, been mocked both times. He'd consulted with an attorney who quoted him $5,000 just to start a civil harassment case that might take a year to resolve. But as David sat there, looking at the water usage data he'd been compiling, his engineering brain clicked into gear. He thought about the municipal billing systems he designed. He thought about water meters. He thought about documentation and legal proof. And he thought about his certification as a professional engineer, which gave him authority to install and certify water measurement equipment in residential properties under state law. If they wanted to use his pool so badly, David decided they could pay for every single gallon, and he knew exactly how to make it legal, documented, and utterly irrefutable. He spent the next 2 weeks researching, ordering equipment, and installing systems the Martinez family would never notice until it was far too late. On August 15th, exactly 73 days after this nightmare began, everything was finally ready, and David Reynolds, The quiet engineer they dismissed as a pushover was about to teach them what happens when you underestimate someone with expertise, patience, and access to professional-grade water billing technology. At 3:20 p.m. on a sweltering Thursday afternoon, the motion sensors activated again. David watched from his office window as Carlos and Maria Martinez opened his side gate. They'd apparently made a copy of his key somehow, and their 3 kids piled through with pool toys and rafts. Carlos carried a Bluetooth speaker. Maria had a beach bag full of snacks. They'd brought 2 other families again, the Johnsons and the Patels, neighbors David barely knew. 12 people total, settling into. David waited until they were all in the water, laughing and splashing, music playing from the speaker. Then he walked out his back door, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the expression he used for contentious city council meetings. Calm, professional, and absolutely unyielding. Everyone out of the pool. His voice cut through the music. Carlos looked up, already smiling with that condescending smirk David had learned to hate. "Come on, David, don't be like that. It's a beautiful day. Why don't you join us? You might actually enjoy everyone out of the pool now, or I call the police and have you all cited for criminal trespassing. You have 30 seconds. David's tone made Maria grab for her towel. The Johnsons and Patels started moving immediately, clearly uncomfortable, but Carlos just laughed. "Dude, we've been through this. The cops don't care." Officer Patterson said, "Officer Patterson doesn't handle civil water utility violations or theft of services. But the city attorney does. 20 seconds. David opened his portfolio, and something in his body language made Carlos finally stand up in the pool. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that for the past 73 days, you and your family have been trespassing on my property and stealing water services. And for the past 16 days, I've been documenting every single gallon you've used with professional-grade measurement equipment that's been certified and calibrated by me, David Allen Reynolds, professional engineer number 87634, licensed in the state for water systems engineering." David pulled out the first document. 10 seconds. The pool emptied fast. As everyone stood dripping on his deck, David continued. Carlos Martinez, 1847 Maple Ridge Drive, age 44, employed as a pharmaceutical sales representative at MedCorp Solutions. Maria Elena Martinez, same address, age 42, high school guidance counselor at Ridgemont High. Your children: Carlos Jr., age 17, senior at Ridgemont; Sophia, age 15, sophomore; and Miguel, age 13, 8th grader at Oakwood Middle. David watched their faces pale. "You want to know how I know all this? I'm a civil engineer who works with 3 city governments. I know exactly how to access property records, business licenses, and public databases. I've also been documenting every single time you've entered my property for the past 73 days. He pulled out printed screenshots, time-stamped and dated. June 22nd, first intrusion, 3:47 p.m., 3 juveniles. June 26th, second intrusion, 3:15 p.m., 5 individuals including 2 adults. July 1st, third intrusion with additional families invited. He kept going, image after image, while the Martinez family stood frozen. I have 217 total intrusions documented across 43 separate days. Maria found her voice shaking. You can't prove we never damaged anything. No, but you stole services, specifically water and heating utilities. And here's where it gets interesting. David pulled out his phone and showed them photos of equipment they'd never noticed. 2 weeks ago, I installed a secondary water meter on the pool supply line, certified and calibrated to commercial standards. Under State Code 24.7.882, a licensed professional engineer can install auxiliary metering for service billing purposes on private property. The meter has been measuring every gallon of water circulated, heated, and chemically treated during your unauthorized use. He handed Carlos a document. This is your bill. itemized by date, time, duration, and water volume. I've charged you the standard municipal rate for water usage, plus heating costs calculated by BTU consumption, plus chemical treatment costs based on contamination load. Yes? I measured that too, plus equipment depreciation, plus a facility's usage fee for the pool structure itself, calculated at commercial pool rental rates. The total comes to $9,743.18. The silence was absolute. Carlos stared at the document, his face shifting from red to white. This is insane. This isn't legal. It's completely legal. You've been stealing services. I've documented the theft. As a PE, I'm authorized to measure and bill for water services. You have two options. David's voice went cold. Option 1, I file this with the city attorney as theft of utilities. I sue you in civil court for the full amount plus my legal fees and equipment costs, which my attorney estimates will push your total to about $15,000, and I provide all this documentation to your employers and your children's schools as part of the public record. Carlos, I'm sure MedCorp would love to know their sales rep steals from neighbors. Maria, I'm sure Ridgemont High would be interested to know their guidance counselor teaches kids that property theft is acceptable. Maria made a choking sound. Carlos's hands were shaking as he held the bill. Option 2? He whispered. Option 2. You pay this bill in full within 30 days. You sign this agreement never to enter my property again without written permission. You reimburse me for the new lock I'm installing on my gate. And you write apology letters to me explaining what you did wrong and what you've learned. David pulled out the agreement. If you comply fully, I don't pursue legal action, I don't contact your employers, and this stays between us. The other families had already left, practically running. Carlos looked at his wife, at his kids, back at David. We don't have $10,000 just sitting around. Then I suggest you arrange a payment plan. My attorney can set up terms. David handed him a business card. You have until 5 p.m. tomorrow to decide. If I don't hear from you by then, option 1 goes into effect automatically. He looked at each of them. You spent 2.5 months treating me like a joke, calling me selfish, telling me I don't understand community. Let me explain something about community, Carlos. Community is built on respect. You enter someone's property, you ask permission. You use someone's resources, you offer compensation. You see someone who's lost their spouse and is clearly struggling, you show compassion, not entitlement. Sophia was crying. Carlos Jr. was staring at the ground. Miguel looked terrified. David felt a pang of sympathy for the kids, but not enough to back down. This wasn't about being neighborly. This was about taking what you wanted because you thought I was too weak to stop you. You underestimated the wrong person. He closed his portfolio. Tomorrow, by 5 p.m., decide. As they walked toward the gate, Carlos turned back once, his voice broken. We really don't have that kind of money easily available. David met his eyes. Then you'll learn to budget. Just like I had to budget for the $7,000 in extra costs you've caused me over 10 weeks. Difference is you chose this. I didn't. He watched them leave, then walked back to his office, pulled up the security footage, and saved everything to 3 separate hard drives. For the first time in 73 days, David Reynolds smiled. Because sometimes justice doesn't come from the authorities. Sometimes it comes from knowing exactly what you're doing, documenting everything, and refusing to be anyone's doormat. And as he looked at the pool that was finally, truly his again, he felt something he hadn't felt in months. Peace. The next morning at 8:47 a.m., David's doorbell rang. Carlos stood there alone, looking like he hadn't slept, holding the unsigned agreement. I need to talk to you. His voice was hoarse. David let him in but stayed near the door, arms crossed. Carlos slumped into a dining room chair uninvited, then seemed to realize what he'd done and straightened up quickly. I'm sorry. I should ask. May I sit? It was the first time David had heard him request anything. He nodded. Carlos laid out the agreement on the table, and David saw the pages were wrinkled, like they'd been read dozens of times. I talked to a lawyer last night, friend of mine who does property law. He looked up, exhausted and defeated. He said, "You're right. Everything you've done is legal. The metering, the billing, all of it. He said if you file, we'll lose in court and probably pay more. He also said what I did, making a copy of your gate key without permission. That's actually criminal, not just civil trespassing. I could face charges for that alone." David said nothing, just waited. Carlos continued. "We don't have $10,000 in savings. We've got maybe $4,000 we can access without penalties. I called my brother. He can lend me $3,000. I can sell my boat for the rest, but that'll take a couple weeks." His voice cracked. "Maria's terrified she'll lose her job. I'm terrified I'll lose mine. Our kids are scared." Sophia hasn't stopped crying. "Carlos Jr. asked me if he's going to jail because we used your pool." David felt the first real pang of guilt, but he pushed it down. "Your son asked that because he realized his parents were stealing. That's on you, not me." Carlos flinched but nodded. I know. I need to ask if there's any way to reduce this. Maybe spread payments over longer, or drop some of the fees. I'm not trying to negotiate out of it, I swear. I just need some flexibility so we can actually pay it without destroying our finances." David sat down across from him, pulled out a calculator and the itemized bill. "Here's what I'll do. The water usage, heating, and chemicals, that's $4,700. That's non-negotiable. Those are actual costs with industry standard rates. The facilities fee, that's the $5,000 for pool structure rental. That's where I have discretion." He looked at Carlos hard. "If you pay the $4,700 immediately, sign this agreement, install a new lock on my gate at your expense, and all 3 of your kids write genuine apology letters that show they actually understand what they did wrong, not just, 'Sorry we made you mad,' I'll reduce the facilities fee to $2,000. Total becomes $6,700. Carlos's eyes widened. "And I can pay that over time?" $4,700 immediately. The $2,000 in monthly payments of $500 over 4 months. But here's the deal. If you miss a single payment, the full original amount becomes due immediately and I file in court. One mistake and option 1 goes into effect." David slid the revised agreement across. "And Carlos, I want you to understand something. I'm not doing this to be generous. I'm doing this because your kids don't deserve to have their lives ruined because their parents are entitled. But you and Maria, you need to learn this lesson hard enough that it sticks." Carlos grabbed a pen with shaking hands and signed. "I'll have the money to you by Monday. The kids will write the letters this weekend. The new lock, what kind do you want?" "I'll buy it. You install it. This weekend." David stood up. "And Carlos?" "One more thing. The Johnsons and the Patels, the families you brought here, they don't owe me anything because they were your guests, not repeat trespassers. But you're going to tell them what happened. You're going to admit you lied about having permission to use my pool, and you're going to apologize for putting them in that position." Carlos nodded, looking sick. "I will, I promise." As he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "For what it's worth, you were right. About all of it. The community thing, that was just excuse-making. We saw something we wanted and took it. Maria and I have been talking all night. We're ashamed. We taught our kids the wrong thing." He looked back at David with something like genuine remorse. "Your wife, Maria remembered her from the neighborhood meetings years ago. She said you two always seemed really happy. I'm sorry we disrespected her memory by treating your home like this." David's throat tightened. He managed a stiff nod and Carlos left quietly. Over the next 2 days, the Martinez family made good on everything. The $4,700 arrived via certified check on Monday morning. The kids' letters came Tuesday, and David was surprised to find them genuinely thoughtful. Sophia wrote about how she'd realized her parents taught her entitlement, and she was working on understanding boundaries. Carlos Jr. admitted he'd known it was wrong, but gone along because everyone else was. Miguel's letter was simplest, but hit hardest. "I'm sorry we stole from you. My dad said stealing is wrong. Now I know he was right." The new lock installation happened Saturday morning. Carlos showed up with professional-grade equipment and installed it carefully, then handed David both keys and the receipt showing he'd paid $270 for the best lock available. "I figured after everything, you deserved the best security I could provide." Then came the twist David hadn't anticipated. On the second Wednesday after their confrontation, Maria Martinez knocked on his door. She was alone, holding a folder. "I need to show you something." Her voice was small, embarrassed. She opened the folder to reveal printed social media posts from 6 different neighbors on the Maple Ridge Community Facebook page. All of them were asking if they could use David's pool for birthday parties, barbecues, or just to cool off. After word got around about what happened, I realized Carlos and I weren't the only ones treating your property like it was community space. We just never thought about asking because we saw other people doing it and assumed it was okay. She showed him messages where she'd contacted each person, admitted what she'd done, and explained why it was wrong. 3 of these families said they'd used your pool last summer when you were away on business before we ever did. They climbed your fence because the pool was empty anyway. Maria looked mortified. "I wanted you to know so you could address it if you wanted to. And I wanted to say I've been talking to some parents at school about this, not using your name, but about teaching kids about consent and property rights. I'm a guidance counselor. I should have known better. I'm trying to do better now." David took the folder, genuinely surprised. "Thank you for telling me this." Maria nodded and left quickly, and David spent that evening going through the Facebook posts, screenshotting everything. He sent a polite but firm message to the community page explaining that his property was private, no one had permission to enter without explicit invitation, and he'd installed security systems to protect it. The messages stopped immediately. 2 months later, on a cool October evening, David sat by his pool with his sister Jennifer, who'd driven in from Phoenix for the weekend. She was the only family he had left, and they'd grown closer since his wife's passing. "So the Martinez family is paying on time?" she asked, sipping wine while David grilled steaks. "Every payment exactly on schedule. The $500 installments. Last one's due in December." He flipped a steak, watching the sunset reflect off the water. "Carlos installed motion-activated lights around my fence at his own expense last month. Said he wanted to make sure no one else tried what he did." Jennifer smiled. "Think they learned their lesson?" David considered it. "I think so." Sophia actually waved at me yesterday when she was walking home from school. Not the fake friendly wave from before, a real, embarrassed, respectful acknowledgement. Carlos Jr. got caught at school trying to sneak into the teacher's lounge and apparently told the principal he deserved detention because rules exist for good reasons. Maria sent me an article she wrote for the school newsletter about teaching kids consent and boundaries. He sat down with his own drink. "They're trying. Whether it sticks long term, I don't know. But at least they're trying. And you? How are you doing?" Jennifer's tone went gentle. David looked at the pool, the space he'd built with his wife's dream in mind, the sanctuary that had been violated and was now truly his again. "I'm okay. Better than I was. I learned something through all this." He met his sister's eyes. "I learned that you don't have to accept being a victim. That knowledge and documentation are power. That standing up for yourself doesn't make you petty. It makes you strong. And that sometimes the best response to people who take advantage isn't aggression or revenge fantasies. It's just cold, calculated accountability." Jennifer raised her glass. "To accountability, then, and to that brilliant engineering brain of yours that turned water meters into justice." David smiled, clinked his glass against hers, and looked out over the pool one more time. The water was perfectly balanced, chemically pristine, heated to exactly his preferred temperature. No uninvited guests, no entitled neighbors, no more stolen moments of peace. Just his sanctuary, finally and completely his own again. He thought about the last line in Miguel's apology letter. "Thank you for teaching me that choices have consequences." David had kept that letter in his desk drawer. Because ultimately, that's what this had all been about. Not revenge, not cruelty, just consequences, delivered with professional precision for people who'd forgotten that other people's property and other people's grief and other people's boundaries actually mattered. And as David Reynolds sat there in peace, he smiled. Because justice, whether delivered through courtrooms or water bills, was equally satisfying when earned. Some lessons needed to be expensive to be learned, and this one had cost exactly $9,743.18, reduced for conscience, itemized for clarity, and documented for eternity. Across the country in Charleston, South Carolina, retired Navy Captain Patricia Okoye was trimming her roses when her new neighbor demanded she remove the eyesore garden that had won 3 horticultural awards. The woman, a real estate agent who'd just moved in, insisted Patricia's English cottage garden was lowering property values and threatened HOA action. Patricia smiled, the same smile that once preceded strategic operations in hostile waters, and pulled out the original neighborhood covenant from 1987 that she'd personally helped draft as the subdivision's founding resident. "Please," Patricia said quietly, "do file that complaint. I'd love to explain to the HOA board you're threatening, the board I founded, why a nationally recognized garden is an eyesore." The realtor went pale and started stammering about property rights. But that's a story for another time.